Wonderful.
Okay. So lovely to meet you. To start off with, could you say your name and where you are?
Well, first of all, hello, Heather. I
Hi.
am I am Dorothy Siminovitch, and I'm in the marvelous city of Toronto in Canada.
Interesting. And
Mm,
the first big question, because we
yeah.
just go right for it, is who are you? Who are you as a human being? And that can be your values, your passions, qualities about yourself, or whatever you would choose to share.
That's the big question that I have to say I ask professionally, but I've been asking that personally all of my life. So I'm going to give you the short answer and then maybe the longer answer.
Great.
I think the short answer is I'm a person who truly wants to make a difference. Full stop. I mean, I want to make a difference. Full stop. And if you added another word, phrase, I'd say I'm a person who wants to make a difference for the greater social good. The longer answer is I'm a person who originated in Montreal, which is a bilingual city that had a lot of problems, but it did teach me about beautiful cities and the complexity of culture and language. And I think that's been a lifelong theme in my work. And I do think that coming with my particular background as the daughter of two Holocaust survivors who came to Montreal as immigrants who couldn't come to America because of a quota system has also been a lifelong theme for me about loss and renewal and resilience and overcoming. And I think that very often I dip back in the story of compassion for others, but also inspiration for whatever the challenge of the moment is, because that story has always been so impressive to me. And I think the third thing that I would say is I've lived in many cities now and I've worked in many cities. And I think that the who am I now is my name is Dorothy. And for many years, I didn't like the name Dorothy. I thought the people who were called Dorothy were like 110. It's an old name. So I didn't like the name Dorothy. I felt kind of lonely with that name and it was archaic. And then I read a Jungian interpretation of the name Dorothy, and that the task of Dorothy following the Wizard of Oz, which is the archetypal American folktale, is that the task of the Wizard of Oz is for Dorothy to find home. And actually, what I really realized is that's always been my work, to find home in myself. And I think as I've gone through the world personally and professionally, wherever I've gone now, it seems that the greater work task for me, as well as my personal task, is to help people find home in themselves and find home in the world. So that's my who am I always comes back to how do we find home? How do we create safety? How do I create safety? And how, no matter what the challenge is, how do we overcome and find our strength, our resilience, our creativity? Yeah.
And what are some of the values that you orient around?
Well, I think that the first value is I always think do no harm. It's something that the medical profession really ascribes to, but I think it's a good one.
Mm.
Don't leave the whatever environment you're going into worse than what you found it. Leave it as good as or better. Um, I think to create safety is very important because the overarching value is how do we evolve and have good learning versus traumatic learning? Because I think that there's a lot of preoccupation with the word trauma these days, which I ascribe to the definition from Peter Levine as too fast, too soon, too much. So how do we slow down our very fast-moving world to support learning, which is a value for me and for many, I think. Learning is the chicken soup of life now. If you can learn, you can overcome. But how do we create safety? And how do we support relationship? You know, first there's a mantra that I love very much. It says, first connect before content. So relationship, connection, creating safety, and inspiring curiosity, which can help us overcome the discomfort of learning. So those are some of my values: curiosity, creating safety, creating interest, making it okay to show our humanity to each other. Many people talk about let's be vulnerable together. But I always like to say yes, but with the right people. So how do we make it the right people? By creating safety.
Okay. So you've given a very nutshell version of where you come from. I'm curious what comes to mind a little bit more extensively as a particular event or a set of circumstances that you would say have really shaped or influenced fundamentally who you are.
A set of circumstances.
Or a particular event.
Well, I do think the set of circumstances is the background of creating. And, you know, even when I go into hardship or I have hardship, I always think about my immigrant mother who didn't finish high school and was displaced and really had nothing, and yet became a very successful entrepreneur. And I always say to myself, if she can, I could. I always say that's my real mantra. But I think if I had to, you know, I've been a set of circumstances. So if I look at my 35-year career at this moment, I think the event for me that was the test of all tests was a rupture that I went through. It's now almost 15 years. And I thought that was going to be the most difficult thing that I had gone through. And the interesting thing is it turned out to be the doorway to possibility. And I think, you know, people always say, oh my God, that was the worst thing. And now I follow that up and say, and what doorway did it open up for you? So the doorway for me was that an event happened while I was at the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland that was a leadership rupture that was really pretty intense. And yet what that opened up a doorway to is me joint venturing with two colleagues of mine from Turkey and bringing a coaching program to Istanbul, and the rest is history. This is our 15th year. And it kind of opened up the doorway of Europe, Scandinavia, Asia, London. And it kind of put me in a different milieu where I said, okay, maybe I can write a book. Something that I hadn't even, you know, when you go to a foreign country, they always say, do you have a book? And you think, why not?
I shouldn't I?
You know what? That's exactly what happened to me. I thought, oh my God, they're going to ask me about a book. So I thought I can do that. And the interesting thing about that is the universe rewards you for the effort, because I wrote a book. A year later, they translated it into Turkish. I mean, that is just, okay, I should have really had better readers on the translation. Translation is a big thing for Gestalt, I have to say. But it was marvelous. And I look back at the bleakness of having a disruption. And I think that's actually what the evolutionary moment is. If we play it safe, we don't take a risk. Or if we're afraid of everything, we don't push ourselves. Interestingly enough, evolution is where we are inspired to meet the challenge with new thinking, with new action. And so that question you raise, it turned out to be a very positive experience. And I would never, ever have predicted that. So it still feels like my body says, I can't believe it.
Mhm. Well, it's interesting. I love looking at the paradigms, and I stole this from a climate change documentary when they look at the evolution of paradigms, which is, growth and then sustainability.
Yes,
And so much value is placed on sustainability, but then there's the other paradigm, which is collapse and finding the value in that and allowing change and allowing innovation.
right,
It's just like, yeah, let it go, let it crumble.
right. Well, the redrafting, the recreation does actually come up with a whole new, let me use the word, a whole new gestalt.
Mhm.
And not from retrofitting, partial fitting, fitting in, but from just occupying the space in a way that you couldn't even have imagined.
Mhm.
Amazing.
Yeah. So another question for you would be, which other human being or human beings come to mind as having had that impact or influence in any aspect of your life? Who would you say has been a part of who you are?
There have been people along the way, but I'm going to say maybe, the key person for me always is truly my mother, who was a raging success and could not, I mean, she would have to do a contract with notaries and she'd say, how do you spell the word? And they say, you don't know, Madame Anchor, how to spell the word. She said, no, 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 you spell it, I can write it.
Mhm.
And I think that level of audaciousness has really supported me in working with leaders, irrespective of the hierarchical position, the power position, the culture position. Um, just to remember that everybody is a human being. They have to get dressed, they have to take a shower, they have body things to do. And I walk back and think to myself always, when I'm really at my bleakest, I can do this. And that comes always from my mother. And because I did not come from having a family system, I decided, like, relatives actually, I decided in my early adulthood and my graduate studies, I was going to adopt Kurt Lewin as an uncle. And I always think of him as, well, he's the father of social psychology. And when I used to read about Kurt Lewin, I always would read that every one of his students succeeded because he was so loving. He would say, you can do this. He was extremely, short little guy, died too young in 47 when he was like, not even quite 50 something. But he was a remarkable thinker and generative and supportive. And I would say that he, very often that phrase is, if you don't know what the norm is, just try to break it. And you will get, the universe will tell you.
Mhm.
So I always say, well, what are the norms here before we break them? This very Kurt Lewin. And I think the next person that I always love to quote, and this is kind of very grandiose, but I'm going to say to you is, I call Einstein my uncle. So I always say Uncle Albert. I have actually a authentic black and white photograph of Einstein on my wall of family pictures. And people over the years had said, he's a member of your family. And I'd correct them. I said, no, no, no. I came through my husband's family, and it was a payment for something that they couldn't afford. It was a visiting photographer. And then I would say about 12 years ago, when someone said, he's your family, I'd say, well, it's all relative. And that's exactly what happened, Heather. People would laugh, and I'd think, nobody understood what he did, but everyone understood relativity.
Mhm.
And that actually is inspiring to me. So I always say to people, well, it's relative, as my uncle would say, Einstein. And it always makes me smile, but particularly around, you see it this way, you see it that way, it's relative. And I
Mhm.
think that's very useful because isn't that the essence of our differences, wherever we go?
I think that's a really sweet example of like healthy entitlement, of
Mm.
feeling like you are allowed to connect with and be on the level of.
And I tell people, that's exactly, I say, you can adopt him too.
Mhm.
It's free.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting. Not everyone, when I ask this kind of question, will name people they don't have an intense personal mutual relationship with. And I think it's really beautiful when someone has adopted or really assimilated and taken in an author or a thinker without ever having met them and interacted with their voice and their physical body.
Well, I tell you, that's very interesting that you say that, because I was at an organizational development conference, and I think the year was 2008. And I stood up and I said something that I thought Kurt Lewin might have said, something about, harnessing the trajectory of your will to the energy bringing you forward. It was a line, I'm married to Kurt Lewin, and his grandson was in the audience. That was an amazing moment, actually. So you never know.
Mhm. Nice. So, going a slightly different way with this,
Yeah.
as you go through the world and place yourself in all of these circumstances and relationships, I'm curious how you have come to understand and experience your gender or experience yourself as a woman.
Well, that is the huge question of these times, I think. Um, I think in particular, there is a force that is looking to have women come back into kind of a bounded place. When you look at what happened in Iran with this young 22-year-old Amini, who was beaten for not covering her hair. And you look at these new laws in America trying to tell women who has power of their body. And of course, the outrage that women are really trying to really have their voice be heard. I think two things are paradoxical. I think it's never been a time as wonderful for women, but we are at risk. And when the decision makers of the law are more men than women, we are at risk. So I do think of myself absolutely as female. And I also think in various parts of the world, anything can change. So it's not something that I think women should take for granted. And I know that, you think of the women's, what was it like in 2018? It was 100 years since women could vote. We should not take anything for granted. And that now in America, the laws are being changed. And I don't want to name it, it feels so easy to get political, but a lot of women are going to be suffering. And so I think we have to stand up against the forces of repression and trying to make women know their place. I think that is just the worst thing I can think of. So I think of being female every day. And I think sometimes when I think about 3 or 4 years ago, I'm on Facebook, even though with all the changes, I don't know how to manage all of that. But there was a day where I was asked to darken my, whatever that's called, when you put a new profile picture out. They said, we want you to darken it, and so you will be voiceless. And I said, well, why is that actually? They said, well, we want you to stand with all women to really show the power of women. I said, to be voiceless, to be nameless? I don't think so. I've spent how many years getting all of these degrees, looking at what I can do, not so that I could be voiceless. I want to stand up and be a person who has a voice about not being voiceless. And I said, I'm not going to blacken my face and, darken my profile to be voiceless. And then someone said, oh my God. I said, that's right. Oh my God, what are you doing? And I think we get carried away by not understanding the history of female oppression. If you're Black and you're female, if you are from a different country and you're female, if you're from Afghanistan and you're female, if you're from Iran and you're female. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So I think we should look at all the countries where women don't have full power. And then we who have power have to ask ourselves what we're doing with our privilege.
And how do you manage that? How do you understand? How do you navigate your power and your privilege?
Well, sometimes you have to be willing to take a stand, to say what's so, to stand up at a conference and say, I disagree with your position. to write a response, whether it's a political opinion, to post something on LinkedIn, to say what's so, and own your position. I think that's what voice is all about. Maybe we're wrong, but we have to exercise our voice and learn from the experience. And here's the other thing. I think women could be more supportive to women. I think women who are in a leadership position could say, can I support you? Can I give you feedback? Can I help you in this presentation you're doing? Very often people contact me for those kind of moments, because I will tell people, when you're really invited to be on the stage, it's the loneliest place, because you have to really deliver. And that's when you, as a woman leader, should really be thinking, who can help you or support you so that you can shine the way you want to shine.
So enabling others?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
You know, on my faculty, on my coaching faculty, you haven't asked me about that, but I'm just going to say, so I'm a master certified coach through the ICF, International Coach Federation, and we have 7 women. They're all MCC faculty. And we didn't need to have MCC faculty, 7 of them, but I said to, whenever they got their MCC, I said, wonderful, it's fantastic. And we can all shine. It doesn't have to just be one person. Everyone wants to have privilege. Everyone wants to be invited. So that's actually what we have to be thinking of. How to enable, how to make sure, I've done this, would you like to do this? What's up next? Giving opportunity to other women is also a part of enabling.
Okay. Well, I do want to know more about what you do, but the last question that I want to ask you personally is how you're experiencing this time in your life in terms of age and aging. How is that whole process or that perspective for you?
Was probably the best time to become an older person. I mean, because we know things now about longevity that 100 years we didn't. 100 years ago, the age span or the lifespan was typically about 45 to 50. And I think, and also developmental psychologists basically say, you don't even develop after about age 35 to 40. So that was a pretty depressing, bleak thing. And I think right now there's more opportunity.
I didn't know that because there was no one alive to study, but
and I think people also accept it. Oh, I'm older, finished. It was an automatic closed mindset door. I think what's happening now is that we are looking at what I think a term that I love very much is becoming modern elders. So to be 55, 60, 65 and older, we can start saying, am I being a wisdom person for particularly younger people? Am I navigating my life so that I'm making healthier choices? I think it's really an important thing. Am I using these years so that I'm living, not just coasting along? Everyone, there's research on when are the optimal times to be scientifically, have the breakthrough. Well, it turns out for tech people, it's in your 20s. Rock and roll people in your 20s, medical discovering in your late 20s, conductors in your early 30s. But I think for philosophers, for psychologists, I think that we have more time to add wisdom. And I think also our theory is very inspiring, developmental theory or Gestalt theory, which is more process-oriented, but also borrows from development, helps give us more things to be aware of. So I feel actually, even though, yeah, I'm no longer young, there's no question about that, but I feel kind of still very much able, still very much willing to travel, still able to carry my luggage. So I feel very, what's the word, you want to use? I feel very privileged. And every time I see someone who can't, I feel even more, do not take this for granted.
I think I'm hearing a really interesting kind of differentiation there. I mean, we hear about the differentiation in adolescence, right? But that I am no longer, and sort of recognizing coming in to a different position, to a different identity phase.
Well, the person who wants to keep being told that they're younger, they're missing something kind of extraordinary. They're missing wisdom. They're missing the
That's
opportunity.
older.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely true. So I do think, I very much have always loved the work of Eric Erikson. I think, he's just was the big genius of the 20th century, but he really spoke to, if you're not doing your own developmental work, you'll have ego despair versus, appreciation of possibilities, and being in congruity. So I think about that a lot. Am I doing what gives me satisfaction? Am I still making a difference? Is this what I want to be doing? These are the questions that I think as we go further in the lifespan, we need to be asking ourselves, because that's also the way to stay healthy, to stay engaged, to be relevant.
Interesting. So into the doing, how did you meet Gestalt? Where did that come into your life?
Such an interesting, I think Malcolm Gladwell years ago wrote a book, Outliers or something, and he said living close to places allows you opportunity. So I was in Montreal. I had a very young age. I had a job working in a hospital I was a neuropsychometrician, unusual. I was just out of college early on, and I had this serious job, and I was moving to Cleveland, Ohio. My husband was I just got married. My husband was taking a residency. And one of the psychologists says that, oh, Cleveland, oh, there's a Gestalt Institute there. And I was like, I had no idea what that was. I listened to him and then, of course, I came to Cleveland and I went to graduate school. And again, kind of wasn't mentioned, but I found like a sense of, okay, I went to school, there was an academic quality to it, but there wasn't a very lively quality to it. And I'd heard, go to the Gestalt Institute. I had no idea. So I just went there for a weekend event. And again, I thought it was bizarre, but interesting. Like people were talking and I'm thinking, do you have to have this problem and that problem? But it was a different experience. It was very lively. It was very engaging. It was very heart-touching. And here's the interesting thing, whatever those workshops were, they were encounter groups, really weekend encounter groups of 12 to 15 people. In the diversity of all the people, by the end of the weekend, we were all one. And that was a very interesting outcome to me. I loved it. That's how it started.
I'm sitting on the, can you say more about the being one without acculturating, without confluence, with differences? How?
So, you talk about, and that was many years ago, and I was kind of looking back, both young and absolutely clueless, but about what truly was happening. People were different in terms of age, different in terms of gender, different in terms of lived experience, different in terms of accents. I did at the time, I think you might be Canadian. Is that true?
Yeah.
Because I hear that about. Where are you from?
I was born near Hamilton.
Okay, well, there you got it. I heard it. And I love these little moments where the language tells you something, right? I feel like what's that, My Fair Lady, and by gosh, I think you've got it. In any case, there were so many differences between that group in terms of, gender, language, culture, accents. I'm from Montreal, which is just nuts about how we dress. And these people were like, did they just wake up? I mean, this is how I thought in those days. What are you doing? And yet at the end of the weekend, people would say, I feel the same way as you do. I didn't realize I could see what you're saying, or I feel what you're saying, or I didn't think I was going to like you when I like you. And to me, that could happen within the space of a day and a half, 2 days, it was miraculous. I thought, okay, what really happened that everyone is having this kind of transformation? It was fantastic. And that's really moving from the I to the you to the we. I didn't have that language, but that's how I remember this kind of shift, blurring of differences to more connecting.
Okay. And so what else did you find over time? What did you find in Gestalt? What were you drawn to, or what have you really dove into?
Well, I didn't think I was ambitious, but I must have been, because I decided to go for a PhD. And I went to Case Western. So I got a master's in clinical psych, and then I had decided to go get a degree in organizational behavior, because I had decided there's something about this moving from the world of therapy to the world of management that is appealing. Moving from coping to managing actually appealed to me, because I felt, gosh, I don't know if people can really move beyond coping, but managing it, or is that maybe more interesting? So I got interested in that, but that world still felt very aloof. And the Gestalt world, to me, felt more, I mean, it's in the language, contactful. It felt more humanizing. It felt more vivid. So, and this is from Laura Pearls. I always use her three distinguishers of the Gestalt approach. It's experiential, so people are always engaged. And I felt that was very enlivening. And then I also felt it was very creative. Like, it didn't matter what the agenda was. Like, I think Gestalt is the ultimate school of improv. No matter what happens, we could make something happen. I mean, I haven't done improv training, but I've done Gestalt training, and that is improv for me. And I always feel that there's something magical about it. In fact, I even wrote an article with a colleague called The Pragmatics of Magic, that we could make something with engagement. And the third thing is, I think it's the theater of now. How do we use the present moment in a way that drives possibility? And that's always what's so, when people are really here now, we remember them forever.
Presence. Ooh.
Exactly. It's presence became the thing that I got fascinated by.
Say more.
Yeah, I could say. I have I'm just going to make you laugh. I do a whole workshop now on presence, because I do think that presence is the core of Gestalt work. We are the instrument, and, how we embody the now and how we show up the dimensions of, first, who am I? And here's the interesting thing. Is my soma congruent with my story? I say that I want to be standing for myself and others. I better look a little bit awake, no? If I'm like asleep and I say that, I'm not really going to do a job, right? But do I embody the message of my values? Do I look like you can count on me? Our soma is always speaking, and is speaking congruence with values. Second aspect of presence is, what's my creative energy, my curiosity? Like, I had to ask you about your accent. I had to, but I mean, and it's, what's the playfulness, and what's the willingness to make mistakes? Brene Brown is just fantastic for being able to write about willingness to make mistakes. In fact, I think she does a TED talk that I found hilarious. She talks and she says, everybody who does a TED talk, they should call it the failure talks, because everyone who is famous, they first start talking about their mistakes. So we too, how do we create more appreciation for curiosity and the necessity, no failure, no learning. The third aspect is, what's our emotional capacity? Fourth aspect is, how do we use our empathetic gifts, our empathetic reaching out from sympathy to empathy to compassion. The fifth place is, how do we use our communication skills? Does what we say align with what we feel? And does you hear me in a way that is congruent with the message I want you to hear and feel? It's actually, Gestalt is very good on that. So if I'm not speaking in a way that is congruent with my message, if my voice sounds harder than my message, or my face conveys faking it, it's over. we just won't buy it. Sixth dimension is intuition, and in a very fast-moving world, we're more willing to use our intuitive moments, but we need to actually cultivate that muscle to know the difference between intuition and projection. And the last piece, and I think this is very powerful, our capacity to read the field. And that's pure Gestalt, and yet it is incredible skill to have, to be present and read what's happening in the moment, to be able to tilt to whatever is emerging. So presence is all of those dimensions in my being, but also accessing that is being able to do what is needed in the moment.
So I'm hearing you articulate these things very clearly, systematically, recognizing and naming patterns. Yay, it's not a mystery art. It's not abstract, fluffy stuff. It's things which are teachable and predictable and
absolutely
congruent with repeated deep patterns of human behavior.
Yes.
So what do you do with this? What is the essence of what you do and how you do it? I mean, how do you position yourself?
So maybe I can actually move into what makes coaching different from therapy and different from OD. Because we all know that Gestalt coaching, Gestalt therapy has been a very vibrant stream of thinking since certainly post-World War II, all of the Cleveland School, the New York School, worldwide Gestalt therapy is very much respected. And then, of course, there's Gestalt consulting, which is also very much respected and used in OD. But Gestalt coaching is this amalgam of the best of clinical skills married to the understanding of the structure of organization, structure of the mechanics of learning, and the delivery of how do you move through your patterns towards your desired goals, or how do you retire outdated patterns. And as a coach, there are some principles that I think we have developed, mostly not only through Gestalt coaching and the Gestalt stance, but in aligning ourselves with regulatory bodies like the International Coach Federation. I thought that was just a thing of genius to get accredited by them so that we could become an actual viable profession that was recognized and also had Gestalt coaching to it. So when someone comes to us, Gestalt practitioners have always said we're collaborative with the client, but in Gestalt coaching, it's absolutely essential that we are collaborative with the client and that we have our client identify what are you wanting or you may be needing, and can we have permission to give you our perspective, be a mirror, be a witness to how you are moving towards or moving away. And this is so often, it's a little bit like looking in your rear view mirror. You need to have a rear view mirror to see what's behind you, but you also need to know that you will have a blind spot. And all of us have a blind spot. And what we can do as coaches is collaborate with our client and really invite them to give us permission. Can I give you deep feedback about what I see? Can I ask you bold questions that cause you to go into yourself and really think and be disturbed. Here's the other thing about coaching. We want permission, and I love this.
It's disturbing. I'm sorry.
Or what's the disturbing piece?
No, I think that's beautiful. The word disturbing is.
Yes, it is disturbing. Actually, there's a wonderful sentence. I didn't come up with it. I'd like to, may I give it to you? Do you have to go? Yeah. There's a wonderful sentence from this thinker at the Kennedy School. I love it. His name is Ron Heifetz, and he says, our job as coaches, and also he means as leadership consultants, is to disturb the client at a level they can tolerate. So if you're doing well, it's not about making you happy. It's about supporting you to see new possibilities and literally to see what you haven't seen before. And so sometimes we say, wait a second, did you see that you missed this? And people go, you're kidding. I say, how did you miss that? Or you saw it, but you still missed it. How did that happen? And I think those are the ways that very often when we are giving these observations, inevitably, we are going to be right there giving observations about someone's being, their presence, or someone's use of self, their doing. And then we need to give very clear data-based observations. Look, I saw you do this. Would you know what? Or, and here's where the coach really has to be doing very clear self-management. I can give you a projection of how I feel when I saw you do this. This is about me. Are you interested in seeing how I experience you? And that is an aware projection, very valuable to do. The other piece about it is to also give observations. Look, I don't know what this means. I notice this. Again, observations, projections are not feedback. And very often people make a mistake about that. So getting clear about that and coming back. And then, I think this is where also we're so powerful in Gestalt methodology, constructing learning experiments. When someone gets stuck and they, say, I am like this. I don't know how to be any other way, right? Well, if you could be another way, what would that way be? Well, I want to be able to use my emotions. Okay. If you could, in this terrible situation that you described, can we go through that and, we will construct an experiment. Okay. What emotions are you feeling? Person says, okay, I can't say it. I said, is that what you usually do? Not name the emotions. I can't say it. And that's the pattern. And really working right there, going slower, really inviting the person, what happens to name the emotion, to say the emotion? What does it pull up from your history that is just, so difficult for you to manage? And that's where the work is. So I think, Heather, in many ways, we talk about presence, and this is where our work is with our clients, invited into deep vulnerability. We really need deep vulnerability because learning is, you're walking into the unknown. And if you're not doing that, then you're just you're just doing something boring that is not really deep. It's surface, but it's not going into the unknown. One of my clients says that working from coaching is to have permission to be in the discomfort zone. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, what we need to do. So it's either about their being, their presence, or it's about their doing. And we're shifting between presence and use of self. Very often when we change our skills, we either have to enlarge or rewrite our presence. Oh, this is me now. It's a little bit when you say, who are you? Well, we're constantly evolving ourselves, Mm-hmm. So how do we wrap up our who am I now? Because who I am now is probably not the person I'm going to be in 10 years. And that's a good thing. Am I continuing to wrap myself up? Mary Catherine Bateson, the granddaughter, I think it was the daughter of Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson. I once heard her in a lecture. She was so brilliant. She says, if you want to stay married, you have to keep changing your story. because every 10 years, it used to be 7 years, but every 10, 15 years, you have to be a new person to maintain the interest of each other. And I think that's true for us as well. We're married to ourselves. Can we keep saying, who am I now? And am I evolving?
Yeah, I don't think it's a question. I don't think it's an am I. I think it's sitting down every so often to recognize the evolution that is already happening.
And I say it as a question so that we can answer it.
Mhm.
Am I, or I could say, am I sitting down to really recognize how I'm evolving?
Mhm. So you do this disturbing, questioning, challenging, growing, creative play. I love the lightness that's in it, the creative disturbances.
Yes.
Where do you do this? Organizationally, systemically, individually? Like how do you situate yourself?
So it's great that you asked, because my answer is we can do all of that. The question is, what's the balance? So from our Gestalt coaching program, we now do it online, but sometimes if we do it in person, we may have someone who says, I'd like you to work with me, with my group, with my team in an organization. So it could be becoming invited to do internal executive coaching, or some of our graduates are actually internal and they'll use these coaching skills to work internally. Or people can come to us and say, a CEO of a bank says, I've heard about you, I'd like to work with you for 10, 15, 20 sessions on using more of my empathy, particularly in the COVID years. I mean, I think it's hard to say the COVID years because I don't know if we're really beyond it, but I wish we are. But then, you don't know what you're wishing for. The world is so shaky right now. But I think we can work with clients inside the organization, outside the organization. We do team coaching. That's the one thing I think, when you think about many approaches to coaching, so many identify as individual, whereas Gestalt coaching, it's a systems approach. It could be at the individual level, the team, the dyad level, the team level, the department level. So, where is the boundary that holds the work for us to work at? And we get invited there, and then we contract. This is what you want to work at, and we either do a coaching, we will work with you for 8, 10, 15 sessions, and then we will reassess. So as a coaching perspective, they are always in charge of the work. We will use the techniques that we know are Gestalt techniques, paying attention to awareness, paying attention to, something that's called the unit of work. What did we achieve today? What do we want to work on? Always leaving the client with a little bit of homework between sessions, because that's where accountability and ongoing change, we become what we practice. So inviting people to practice. So we do teams, we do corporate work, we do outside work, and we also do individual work that is, someone just a couple of years ago wanted to work with me at the individual level outside her, at the time, organization, because she didn't want anyone knowing that she wanted to work on a huge challenge, but keep it private. And again, for us as coaches, confidentiality is such a big thing. So it's essential, right? So this is the other thing about coaching is, in today's very fast moving world, that we can offer this safe place with the technology of learning to help people regain their balance, work on, is my perspective needing to be enhanced? Why am I missing something? Is my communication needing to be retooled, or do I need to say it better? Or am I not really somatically standing in my strength? Do I need to do something for myself so that I walk into my environment feeling stronger as opposed to contracted? I say about Gestalt is we are the very first somatic theory. We're the very first neuroscience theory. We're the very first communication theories. And I don't think I'm working hard. I think we are. But I think need to own all the different dimensions. So I think one more thing, Heather, I think now we have more understanding of the power of Gestalt, but it takes a lot more practice to use that understanding. So it's a wonderful time to be offering Gestalt coaching, because I do think the last thing that I want to say about that is, in a very fast-moving world, what we really do is help people with their awareness. And what's the thing in a fast-moving world? Lack of awareness. The competition for awareness, the overwhelm, the trying to pay attention. Let me watch TV. Let me numb out my awareness. So I think we need to support people. How do you work with enough of your awareness so you can support yourself, support your family, support your work, support what matters? And that's what we do well.
So how has doing what you do, the way you've done it, where you've done it, how has it affected you as a person?
Well, I think you use the word of being somewhere. It's a huge privilege. I mean, I've done a lot. COVID actually stopped I used to be in Istanbul almost 3 months a year between all the trips for the last 15 years. And then COVID actually, we changed that. But I would go to Istanbul and people would always say, well, did you visit all these fabulous places? And I'd say, no, I visited people and they let me visit their interior. And that's a story. So I do think that it is extraordinary to do this work. Very big privilege, where highly competent people choose to work with you, me, or another coach around something that is important to their lives or important to their work. And, at the end of the day, when I go back home or I stay in my space, I go, I know that I made a difference. I know that I supported someone. It's a little bit, maybe not huge support, but just what they needed so that they could go back and say, I got what I needed, I'm doing this. And sometimes people will come back to me a year or two later and say, I'm really doing this. I just wanted you to know. What a remarkable feeling that is. So I do feel the relevance of this. I do feel the good fortune. And, as I read a book by someone on coaching, I'm doing all this reading for another program, and she said something like, she didn't find coaching, coaching found her. I think that's actually how I feel. I got into coaching just when it was really starting, but I felt that this new thing was emerging that would allow people who knew that they were in charge and they were able, they were capable, and still they needed more support. So coaching is this highly democratic, co-constructed, collaborative approach that it's a privilege to meet people who ask us for support. It's amazing, actually.
Yeah, I like that word relevance. I mean, it's not like being useful in a utilitarian way, but it's being invited, it's being included, being valued. That's quite appealing.
Well, I would say, and not only that, your title, the humans at Gestalt. What's the actual title? Could you say it?
Humans of Gestalt, stolen with no permission from the humans of New York, humans of Dubai, humans.
No, I love it.
Series.
Well, I think Gestalt is the humans of coaching. I think we're very organic, whatever happens to go breathing, very good. You think breathing, I started a presentation with a group of people. I had them breathe. And then I said, okay, now we're going to really look at, now what are you aware of? Okay. And then every single moment was built on awareness. And at the end, I thought, okay, you didn't realize where we were going, but it was all connected to your breathing, to the moment, to the together, and everything hung together. And it was them doing the work. And it was the Gestalt theory making the explanation. That is pretty marvelous.
What are the bits that have been crunchier for you? What have been the challenges? Where have you really had to grow to be able to do what you do?
Well, I laugh when I say this, but I remember when I first, the very first coaching program that, I said, we can get this ICF accredited. People had said, well, you can't get a Gestalt program accredited because it's idiosyncratic, it's unique. No one assesses someone else's experience. And I said, it's an oxymoron, but we can do that. And I think that was,
Many accredited morons out there.
it sounds funny. I like the word oxymoron because it actually takes the moron and it makes it clever. Like no one's really moronic, but if you could reshape it, that's genius, right? And I think that's, to make the magic of Gestalt teachable. So that we could say, wait a second, this is an awareness moment. Let's unpack that. To also, in a world where, look at the terrible things that are happening. I don't want to get into that story, but it's relevant that people have different perspectives and nobody can talk to each other, and we have to talk to each other so that we can come back and say, wait a second, you see this old lady? Where's the young lady? That's an old image, but very often I say to people, anyone out there can't see the old lady? And people put up their hands like this because they don't want to say, I can't see it. Or I say to people, who can't see the young lady? You have to kind of count on people not seeing one or the other. And then you have to say, can I work with you to see what you didn't see? So helping people see a different perspective, that is a challenge, but it's also absolutely needed. And then the other thing is very often we offer something and someone says, I don't like what you said. And you need to take a breath and say, all right, how is that for you to tell me? Was it safe enough? What shifted? I mean, being able to use, this is where the improv really works. Whatever happens, using that as an opportunity. I think one of the most challenging work pieces I've ever done was also the transformation moment. I was facilitating a Gestalt group, and when I did the rotation around giving feedback, it was maybe the third or fourth rotation. One of the client participants saw me ring the bell to give the feedback, and he started yelling, that Dorothy, Dr. Siminovitch, who, and he started saying terrible things. And all the people in the room thought, I could see, they think the workshop just died. I thought the workshop just died. And I remember in that moment thinking, don't fall apart, get up, get up, get up and join that guy, join him. I'm thinking, what ended up happening was not only did I stand up, by the time I stood up, I looked at this guy that had called me horrible names. I said, thank you. That was great. And I kept, because the truth is, I am interrupting you. It is frustrating. It's wonderful that you did that. That's what has to happen. We need to really engage with you. Learning is not easy. That's what doing and I went through all of this and I said, let's take a 5-minute break. And then we came back. No one saw that coming. And I think that's the interesting thing. So again, I come back with, we need to do our work so that when difficult, we need to practice being in our strength so that when we get challenged, we can continue breathing so that we can, when you stop breathing, your prefrontal cortex goes 30% less and you stop thinking. When we get challenged, we need to continue breathing so that we can continue thinking. And then we need to deliver something small.
Well, and it would be incredibly unfair if you weren't modeling the ability to be disrupted.
Exactly.
To assimilate challenge as well.
I think so well said and so true. Are we the person that they hope to become? Are we modeling what they want to learn?
I'm just appreciating a participant in a recent group that I did. She clearly waited for the entire 6 sessions just to have the opportunity to say how much she disliked everything I said and did. And it was wonderful feedback and it was very welcome. I was not expecting anything else. I was just appreciative that she showed up and was able to be honest, even if it was in the last 10 minutes.
Well, that was a very big piece of work for her, wasn't it?
Then
Wonderful.
I wonder if that could have been invited in earlier. It's sort of my own learning of not expecting the praise, but how can we all deal with all of these differences and not having a value judgment on acceptance and confluence and placing that over, those challenges and those disruptions and the critical thinking, which I adore.
I think actually, Edie Seashore, who was a very famous OD consultant and ran NTL for many years, marvelous. She and her husband wrote a book on feedback. And she said, for a culture, for OD culture in particular, who talks about feedback, we rarely give it, which is, so probably the invitation for feedback, right up front, early on, is actually very valuable. But I think listening to you, what a wonderful piece of work you supported her to have. And that's wonderful.
So thank you. And what's next? This is kind of, where do you think you're going? Where are you intentionally taking your work and your projects? And also, where do you think Gestalt is going? Because you've talked about, the fast moving, the changing, the postmodern world. Where do you see Gestalt having a place in that or creating a place in that?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think for one thing, it's wonderful that we're doing this interview, and yet at the same time, more books are being written, and that's probably important, So when I did the Gestalt primer, The Path Towards Awareness Intelligence, it's now in its second edition. I'm thinking I have to do a third edition to make it tighter, actually, or one of my colleagues told me I should have done it tighter for the second edition. I said, no, that's the third edition. So that was an interesting thing for me to kind of see that. I think Gestalt is something within the sector called vertical development thinking, and that is the paradigm of how to work with awareness. I think we need to be very visible about the fact that we have technology, about how to work with the here and now in a way that we can grab the data. I mean, I think in these little moments, we can just grab the moment and then offer a choice to people. And that's what we need to support people to grab the moment that matters, because sometimes when people go home and they say, well, why didn't I do that? Because we also needed to empower them to do that. I think, John O'Hanafin and Marianne Rainey, who you interviewed, wrote that wonderful book in the Leadership in the Age of Not Knowing. I think Gestalt can be very helpful to walk into the age of not knowing. And I think we need to slow down our encounters with each other and, first of all, own what we know. Own what we know. We're moving into AI, and I think that's great. But very often I used to apologize for my terrible PowerPoints. They have to be jazzy and now then I started saying, okay, but just remember, you are the point of power. How are you using yourself? How are you showing up? And how are we standing for those moments that we need to use, more constructively, whether it's in our family systems, our school systems, our volunteers. I mean, I think there are many different avenues. Climate change starts in the street corner when you see people throwing things out. I went to Singapore. If you drop a little something in Singapore, you are going to be approached. Mm-hmm. Nobody throws even a little piece of paper away. They put it in their pocket. Okay. So I think we can be much more intentional much more aware and intentional with our behavior. And lastly, I think we can share our awarenesses. I think, what did you notice? What did I notice? I think that that's still the most powerful thing. This project that you're doing, I love it. All these different languages. We should be speaking to each other about how does it work in Russia, in Turkey, where I've done so much with my colleagues. I think what's next, I think they should all be part of this conversation. I also think, the question is, why is Gestalt so compelling in Turkey, in Russia, in Kazakhstan? Why? Well, because it has Pearls used to say he wanted to call Gestalt thinking liberation thinking. There is something very freeing about being able to just say, this is what I'm experiencing. And I think we are actually between evolution and devolution. We are at a choice point in the world. And I think Gestalt could help set us free, and it could bring us together.
Yeah, it does definitely invite that freedom to collapse and to deconstruct in a creative way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's always consistently when we do a workshop, at the end of the workshop, everybody says, I feel so different. We are hungry for that.
Mhm.
We are hungry for that. And I think we have the answer for that. So I have loved this time with you, Heather.
Same. Thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to put in as a final piece of yourself or a final thought?
Yeah, I thank you. I actually think that when I think about the who am I grew up always feeling marginal, right? But I also think that the founders of the Gestalt approach, those early founders, they thought of Gestalt, in opposition to the psychoanalytic movement. And I think there's this great thinker, you probably know the name because his new resurgence, Frederick Douglass, the freed Black slave who was the greatest orator of the 18th century, 19th century. He said, what can you do more of? And he said, agitate, agitate, agitate. And I think we can remember that our marginality allows us to see something that the dominant kind of status quo does not see. So that we really need to look at what Margaret Mead says from an angle, just to see what is not being seen. And that, we talk about the alienated part. If we could help people embrace what they've alienated, whether it's their caring, whether it's their compassion, whether it's their joyfulness, we've done an act of tremendous healing, because we are the theory of holism, and that's what we can offer.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I want to just say thank you so much.
Yeah. This has been lovely. Is it okay for you if we leave this here then? Thank you.